Hi everyone, Sandman here. This video is brought to you by a donation from Peter, and here's what he has to say. Hi Sandman, what do you think about the Red Pill documentary created by former feminist Cassie J that was banned in Australia? Also, have you seen it or actually have any plans to do so? And if so, could you also make a film analysis video please? Cheers! Well Peter, thanks for your donation and I put it to good use and went to see the Toronto premiere of Cassie J's documentary, The Red Pill, as you probably already know. Before I say anything about the film, I need to comment on how far men's rights has come in the last 3 years. Back in 2003, the feminists were outside of the men's rights talks, pulling the fire alarms and stirring up trouble. Now the feminists and female MRAs are increasingly controlling the narrative by putting themselves front and center into the discussion. I looked around the room before the fireworks began, and I noticed that instead of the feminists being outside the room, ready to pull fire alarms, they were inside the room sitting with their boyfriends and girlfriends, and I noticed that roughly 30 to 40% of the people in the room were females. This never would have happened 3 years ago. Back in 2013 and 2014, the majority of people inside were men, and there were usually women outside complaining about such events. But I think something important has happened since then. Feminists have figured out that the men's rights movement doesn't represent a threat to it. It's become irrelevant and the only feminist on the panel didn't even bother showing up for the discussion afterwards to voice her opinions. Cassie J, the creator of the film, doesn't identify as a feminist anymore either. People came to this event expecting protests, but there were just crickets. Women, I believe, have successfully infiltrated the men's rights movement, and although they were first shocked about men trying to gain rights, they realize now that men fighting for them will pretty much get nothing. The label of feminist is also irrelevant because feminists are like guerrilla fighters against men now. Guerrilla warfare is more effective than putting on a uniform and turning yourself into a target. The best example of this is Chanty Banks, or the Big Red Feminist. Everyone laughs or cringes at her, and she's not socially acceptable and she looks like a cartoon figure of a feminist, so it makes sense that feminists in general don't want to identify with her. Feminists are increasingly figuring out ways to feed off their enemies' strength and supply lines. They can wage a covert war because it works. You've come a long way, baby, now, and you're not actually screaming against men anymore. Instead, you're pulling the strings behind the puppet. Peter, you also mentioned Australian feminists getting this film banned. Well, apparently Australian feminists haven't figured out that men's rights is a complete waste of time and won't accomplish anything. In most places, the movement is old, and I don't think that Cassie J interviewed a single man under the age of 40 or 45 for the documentary. The movement is lacking new blood and will probably die out with the current crop of over-the-hill men's rights activists. But MGTOW is unstoppable, and yet MGTOW and the Red Pill Reddit were basically shoehorned at the end of the film like an afterthought. Let's see if Cassie J can get enough men going their own way to put their faces on camera to make another documentary. Let's see if she can successfully infiltrate men going their own way. I highly doubt that that's going to happen. This film and the audience watching it confirms to me that we've entered the age of guerrilla feminism. It's very similar to what happened to the United States when it invaded Iraq. Just because Saddam Hussein and his army took off their uniforms, so they obviously weren't targets, doesn't mean they weren't fighting anymore. With regards to this film, about 40% of the audience, as I mentioned earlier, was women. Feminists originally saw it as a threat, but not so much anymore. Laws aren't changing, so many feminists are seeing that men are now putting their energy into a black hole. Maybe feminists knew all along that it was no threat, but they just wanted to piss off men to make them think that they were heading in the right direction. Kind of like misdirection. There's actually a famous line that when you actually fly over the target, you get a lot of anti-aircraft fire. But what if that fire is just being put there to make men feel like they're getting close to the target when they aren't? As for the film itself, there are so many graphic images of circumcision that no one actually warned us ahead of time, and the crowd was absolutely disgusted. We also see Paul Elam, Warren Farrell, Aaron Pitsey, and Karen Strawn discussing many men's issues. If you've been following what's actually been going on in the men's rights movement over the last 3 or 4 years, you'll recognize that most of the talking points and footage from this documentary have been shown elsewhere. If you've been following what's been going on with the men's rights movement over the last 3 or 4 years, you'll recognize most of the talking points as well as some of the footage from this documentary. I was pleasantly surprised to see that Big Red was actually interviewed for this documentary, and she was acting the same way she did during the time that she told everyone to shut the fuck up on camera. This film is a good way for people that have zero knowledge about the men's rights movement to learn about the important issues and what they are and who the main people in the movement are these days. Over the last 3 years, we've seen the popularity of the honey badgers rise, and they too are featured in this film. So long as women are featured in this film, I don't think that feminists will be complaining much. They recognize that nothing is going to happen, and there's no way to make a change. Sure, MRAs can raise awareness, but our biology as men prevents us from caring about other men the way that we care about other women. Men just can't be seen as victims. I think the world has moved on past the men's rights movement, and the thorn in the side of feminists is now really MGTOW. But I think that feminists are too delusional to admit it, or perhaps they just don't want to talk about it for fear that simply discussing it will spread it. Peter, I was originally planning on reviewing the Red Pill film a long time ago before I put this video out. I contacted Cassie J to see if she would actually send me a screener copy of the film, but she didn't respond, yet at the same time she sent one to Mundane Matt, and he got a copy of it. So she probably got the message, but most likely chose to ignore me. I even thought about asking her a question in front of the crowd why she didn't respond to my Twitter message, but that would have given away my identity as well. Maybe she thought I was going to share the documentary around the web, and that's why she didn't give it to me, and then she probably wouldn't get paid for showing it. When I watched it, I could have recorded the whole thing on my camera and posted the whole thing online if I wanted to be a prick and ruin her source of income. But let's say that she does about 100 screenings of this film in total and makes an average of $2,000 per screening. That means she gets $200,000. Of course, she spent a couple of years on her life on this project, and she probably spent $100,000 on equipment and editing services. But regardless of the money she spent, it's nothing for bringing these issues to the forefront. I spoke to some people that were at the screening as well, and they told me that there might be protests outside. The last time I saw feminists protesting outside a building here in Toronto for a men's rights event was back in early 2014, with Karen Strawn when she was here in Toronto. Since then, I haven't seen or heard of feminists physically going to any location to try to stop an event. Now they figured out it's easier to call in bomb threats instead of going down and protesting in person. Making a bomb threat often gets more venues to cancel their events. But getting back to the documentary, there is actually one heart-wrenching story of a man that was an MRA and he taught his girlfriend about how women trap men by getting pregnant, and then the same women he was dating did this to him. He fought for 14 years to get custody of his son, and he even actually told the judge that his mother was trying to make the boy obese so the son would identify with her side of the family as well as her. So he taught his son how to use a scale and actually measured himself when he was at his house. And the son realized that he would actually lose weight when he was at his father's house. When the mother found out about this, she told the judge, and the judge told the father that he was no longer allowed to weigh his son. This is the best example of toxic female behavior that I found throughout this film. This is also the best example of why men shouldn't have relationships with women and why they should go their own way. I think Cassie J kept this particular section in just for the shock value, and I think that a good MGTOW documentary film would be filled with such personal stories. In this case, the woman doesn't care about her son, nor his health, yet at the same time the man is a bad guy. The son is just the most convenient weapon that she can use against him. He eventually had to stop fighting for custody because it had actually cost him $250,000 to fight for it for 14 years. And then when his son was 14 years old, that's the last time he saw him. At the end of this video, I'm going to share some footage that I took during the event. It's not the greatest with regards to sound quality because the sound for my Zoom recorder was terrible because the organizers had trouble with their soundboard. I knew something like that might happen, so I decided to sit in the front row to get the best possible sound on camera from the panel in front. The people filming this event in the back of the room probably had terrible sound. It was also difficult getting questions from the audience because they didn't use a dedicated mic. I had a wireless mic there as well, and I was willing to share it and pass it around, but there was something wrong with the soundboard configuration. Thanks again, Peter, for your donation and topic, and also don't forget to check out the MGTOW mystery link and like this video. As for everyone else out there, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. And remember, a red pill a day keeps the gorilla feminists away. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.
Cassie, because we're unfortunately running a little bit late tonight, maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit about what motivated you to put this film together, your impressions of how the world has reacted to this groundbreaking film, and then maybe a little commentary on the role that the University of Toronto, because that's where we are tonight, played in making this film possible. Can you do that for us?
Yes, oh my gosh, starting with the significance of showing this film in Toronto at U of T of all places is pretty incredible. I'm glad the show went on. That's exciting. You guys made for some great footage for my film. Yeah, gosh, so making this film, it really did change my life. I don't know if there's anything else in my life that had as much of an impact on me as this past 3 years, or 3.5 years of making this film. As you can see in the film, it was definitely a life-altering journey for me, an ideological struggle and kind of tumultuous time for me. But to give you a little bit of insider knowledge on behind the scenes of making the film, I didn't drop the label of feminist until last year, and so it actually took me 2.5 years until I got to that point where I eventually dropped the label. And I don't mean for this film to tell other people what to do with their own beliefs or what they say as or see as the road to gender equality. But for me, after making this film, that was what was right for me. But yeah, I went into this film thinking that it was, well, as you could kind of tell from the beginning of the film, I thought it was a misogynistic hate group that was looking to turn back the clock on women's rights. And that was the film I was intending to make and thought I was going to expose and be this controversial, in that kind of way, controversial film exposing this hidden underground group of misogyny. And sure enough, I started talking to all these different men's rights activists and people in the middle and feminists, and realized that it wasn't so black and white, and the way that the mainstream media was portraying the men's rights movement was not the same reality that I saw in front of my face when I was doing these interviews. And then just kind of accidentally, I had these video diaries going on throughout filming, and realized that that was kind of its own journey, making the film, and then made the difficult decision to include those in the film, hoping that why I included the video diaries was because it was the film that I would have wanted to see 4 years ago before I embarked on this journey. I think it makes it a little more relatable and easy to digest this red pill. So,
Great choice!
thank you.
We're going to go to questions, and you can address your question to Cassie, and probably many of you will, but the panelists here, you can also ask them what they thought. Perhaps, actually, could each of you just take a minute to introduce yourselves and your background and why you think this film is important.
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Bissett, and you said press the button to turn it on, but I guess I turned it off. Red light. Does this one work? Yeah.
Try all three.
Try both of them. Now,
I think you just have to speak up.
okay, I'm going to project, but luckily I have an amazing voice, so we'll be fine. Okay, so my name is Patrick Bissett, and I'm an Irish journalist and activist, and I became interested in men's rights when actually I moved to Canada, I would say, when I found the culture in Canada to be very different from where I was from, and I found the way in which men and women interacted to be, I guess, somewhat different to what I was used to. I don't really like to say I had a red pill moment, but what I would say is it was after debating perhaps one or two feminists that I came to realize, and well, that things probably weren't what I thought they were, and the idea of equality wasn't quite what I thought it was. And that for me was really when I got interested in the men's rights movement, probably around 2010, 2011. And I've made some very, very good friends along the way. I can see some of them here today. So yeah, it's been quite a ride. And I guess the movie for me feels like a win. In the men's rights movements, there aren't a lot of very obvious, very big wins. And tonight, having seen this, feels like a bit of a vindication. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to see so many people here. So it's pretty awesome. And yeah, just keep going. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. Can you hear me? No? Okay, I'll just project. My name is Vanessa, and I actually got invited last minute because the other woman, I guess, couldn't make it. Can't hear me?
Well, she chickened out.
Oh, sorry, yeah. So I actually, just briefly, I was interested in this film a lot, and I've been following it for the last year because I had a sort of similar journey to Cassie in my 20s. I'm, I think, the same age as her, actually. And I wrote a book, actually, on gender issues, and I ended up including both feminists and men's movement people like Warren Farrell, who's in our book. And I sort of went through all the same conflicts that she went through, having both voices. It was an academic book that took 7 years to fucking publish. And it's basically we included all the perspectives, and it was published with New York University Press, but it took a long time to do. So anyway, I was really interested in the film and seeing Cassie's journey, and I could definitely see certain parallels that I went through, and I think it's been a while since then, so I've also come to new insights in my own journey since then. So I have some different perspectives, but also just really appreciate her journey and her willingness to do this on a big stage. So that's a little bit about me.
Quick question. I understand from reading the preliminary work, and then you also mentioned it in some of your interviews, that back in 2012 or so you were looking into rape culture. That was one of the things you were going to investigate, see if that was a thing or not. So the question is, you've been through all of this. Curious to know, can you confirm or affirm in the West, did you learn that there isn't a rape culture, as as our dear friend Lauren Southern has observed sometime? Or is there a rape culture in the West? What's your view on that?
Oh, good ease in the question. Oh man, that's something I've thought, man, I wish I could make another film going down that rabbit hole, because I'm sure it'd be fascinating, and I think I'd learn a lot more than I do now know about rape culture, or the idea of rape culture, the controversy around it. I would like to explore it more before I have a definitive, this is my opinion about it, but yes, I would agree with what I think you're hinting at, that it's an over-inflated idea that so many people are victims and so many rapists walk the streets, and all women have to watch their back at any rustling bush for a rapist to jump out at them. Yeah, I don't think it's that widespread, and we do, as we can see in the media, we do see active efforts to shame anyone who's accused of rape, whether or not they've been found, the evidence has found them to be guilty. So if we lived in a rape culture, it would be, applauding or hurraying the people who are accused of rape. So we don't see that happening. So yeah, I think it's definitely a giant rabbit hole that I would have loved to have gone down, and I didn't have enough time to in this film. But I think something that is a culture we live in is dismissing male victims, and I've definitely seen that. Victims of abuse or sexual abuse, even as a child. This kind of idea that they're lucky if they were abused by a teacher, or that they should like it because they're a guy, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a sticky subject.
Thank you.
My mother was a learning disabilities teacher, and she had a sexual relationship with a student. And I wanted to know who my father was, and I was actually just committed to CAMH. When she found out I went to a lawyer to try to find out who my dad was, I was committed against my will. What I really want to have openly discussed is the postmodernism and cultural Marxism that seems to be going on, that validates a lot of this nonsense that women preach constantly. And it kind of freaks me out that, like, in the 20th century, we tried to change the minds of men to create communism, this super Western, or this socialist model, and it couldn't be done. You can't have a man to be able to change his mind. And then in the 21st century, communism said, oh, what we'll do instead is change the hearts of women. So they won't love their children, they won't love their husband, and then you can still have women and have this wonderful communist utopia. It breaks my heart. My stepmother's white, and I constantly hear white women say how horrible white men are. It freaks me out. I look at the history of South Africa. Exactly what happened in South Africa is happening in Canada every fucking day. Women hate what men accomplish. They make men hate what their fathers have done, and they isolate their
time. Let's move to the
So my point is, my point about this is I would really like to stop having this fluffy discussion about women's feelings and what I think, and my perspective. I want to hear about us and men. That's what I think. I want to hear about us and people. I want to hear about what we deal with every day. That's what I really want to hear about. Is the cultural Marxism and the fact that there's no place for men in real terms, not this fluffy idea, but in real substance. That's what I'm sorry.
Thank you for your next question. Yes.
Casey, you're on a label of feminism, so what what label do you use now? That's a quick question. And the second one, as a communication professional, how do you think those two divides can be bridged? The men's movement, how can we bridge, from a communication perspective, the men's movement and the women's movement?
Okay. So the first question about what label I've adopted now. I am trying out being labelless for the time being, if that's possible, if people allow that for me. I don't know if that can last in today's kind of society that we live in, where people want to give you labels for yourself if you want to accept one for yourself. But I haven't become a men's rights activist. I've always said I'm just a filmmaker that made a film about the men's rights movement. I'm not an activist, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a journalist. But I was a feminist, and I dropped the label because of my journey making this film, and I still support women's rights and girls being empowered, and always will, but I don't see feminism as the answer to gender equality. So yeah, I don't have a label. I've thought of egalitarian, humanist, equalist, but right now I think I just want to take each issue on its own and have discussions and debates with people, and maybe, I'm 30 right now, so maybe later in life I'll have a more definitive idea of where I stand and put my flag down on a certain territory. Oh, and then the second question, what was it?
How to bridge both.
How to bridge. Well, what I'm doing is just hoping that this film creates a bridge for discussion. I really did make this film with my family and friends in mind, and myself 4 years ago in mind, for the best audience to see this film. Who knows if they'll actively choose to see this film on their own. Obviously they're trying to stop this film from others being able to see it, even if they haven't seen it themselves. But I think a lot of people who have been involved in the men's rights movement over many years know everything that's discussed in this film. So it's just kind of a new way to package it together in a 2-hour-long film. But I hope this film can be seen by feminists and people who've never thought about men's issues before. And one of the first things that a lot of people said to me when I said I was making a film about the men's rights movement was they would say, well, what men's rights? What rights are they being denied? So that was one of my big goals with this film, is to try to educate people and bring them up to speed with what are the men's issues. And then let's go from there. But yeah, discussion is key and education is key for bridging the gap.
I'd like to invite Patrick to weigh in.
What was the question?
How
How to bridge the gap.
label.
On my label. I don't really go into labels too much, because I think that the strength of what you say and the arguments that you make are more powerful than any label. But in terms of bridging the gap between MRAs and feminists, I think the best way to do that is for there to be an acknowledgement that men do have issues, real issues that need to be addressed. And we're not going to get anywhere if we continually mock those issues, if we continually think that men don't have real problems. So I think that has to be the start of bridging the gap. An honest attempt at saying, okay, there are problems and let's work to address them. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the gap can even be bridged. That's a different question.
Your thoughts, Vanessa?
Similar to, I think, both Cassie and you, I don't identify as feminist or MRA, and that was also from the outcome of doing my book on the topics. I'm really interested in how we bridge dialogue, and that's kind of what I've been working on for the last decade of writing on these issues, and my own views have changed on that. I think one of the things I would point out, because I'm connected to a lot of people who do men's work in different parts of the world, so the UK and Australia, and obviously Cafe here, I've done some fundraising events with, and I think one of the things is that the film does a bit conflate MRA with men's issues, and I think there's a lot of different people working on men's issues that aren't necessarily MRA as well. So if I had to point one thing that I would add a nuance on, sometimes the MRAs are they're seen as a more radical voice, just like the feminists can be. And there's a lot of people in between working the issues as well that don't necessarily label on either side. I think there was a study that came out in the UK recently that they asked, you know, what you identify as, and like almost everyone said they were for men and women's equality, but only 7% identified as feminists and only 4% identified as non-feminists. So there's this whole 93% of people that don't identify really either way, but the people who dominate the conversation are usually the ones with the loudest voices. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for a loud voice. I'm just adding that side that I think it can sometimes drown out the middle ground, or people get scared to enter into it because there's a lot of strong opinions. It's a hard topic, so.
I'd like to back up that if I may. And I think part of the reason for that is because when you look at the feminist movement and you look at people who speak in the feminist movement, it is dominated by radical feminism. That's the truth, okay? We can sit here and make it nice and say that, you know, the feminist movement is our friend and it's, you know, a great movement. But the reality is, and the reality in this university, in fact, is that radical feminists are the majority. They are allowed, and they can be quite negative. So I think that's part of the problem as well. If you really want to bring feminism into the picture, bring your moderates, bring the people who have more reasonable things to say, rather than the people like, as we saw in the film, Big Red.
Okay, cool. Let's let your hand first, and then we'll go to Dan. Okay?
Been up since the beginning, Justin. I'd like to point
Many
out-
hands have yeah, so we're going to go to you first and then to Dan. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is for everyone on the panel. Similar question to the last one. How would you go about talking to someone that is a Big Red? Like, if you had someone you really wanted to understand that it's about everybody and not just one or the other, how would you go about talking to that person when they are so dead set against men?
I guess I'll take that.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it can be incredibly difficult to convince somebody of something or to make them see a different point of view when they're very, very entrenched in their own point of view, because, let's face it, people don't like admitting that they're wrong, and those with particularly radical viewpoints, especially so. I think, though, there is value in talking to people with entrenched points of view, because if you're talking to somebody like that, and there's somebody also in the conversation who has a point of view that, well, I don't know, I'm on the fence, I'm not sure, you can help to convince that person to see things in a different way. So there's value there. In terms of changing someone's mind who's so radical and convinced of a certain way of thinking, I'm not so sure that that's a great use of time.
So what you're saying is, like, even if you might not be able to change their mind, you can still affect their thoughts?
No, what I'm saying is I think that there's value in talking to those people if other people witness the conversation and
yes.
see what's going on and see the points of view. So if your point of view is reasonable, backed with fact, backed with reason, you come across as an intelligent, well-spoken person, you're more likely to convince somebody of your point of view, whereas if you're so entrenched and you're so radical and you will not admit or give an inch, that person is probably less likely to see things your way. And really that's where the value is. The value is in trying to convince those who are you know, not quite sure. I think that's the value.
So any thoughts on that? Cassie will come have a conversation with the radicals.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it's going to be a really hard road to get feminists to come to the middle grounds of men's issues being important too. And I think what broke my hard feminist shell was when I started to analyze my own sexist views towards men's issues and started to ask myself, why do I have this wall up when I think of a man being a victim of domestic violence? Why do I not instantly have compassion for a situation or instantly believe he is the victim and he didn't bring this upon himself? When I was interviewing male victims, I was thinking, how did they get in that situation? And there were so many red flags about this crazy woman he was dating and why didn't he get out sooner? But I knew if a woman was telling me she was a victim of her husband's violence, I wouldn't have been asking those questions. So when I started to reverse the genders, I saw my own bias against men's issues. And that's ultimately what started to make me wonder, well, if I have this bias, I think others do too. And I found that out when I was talking to my family and friends about men's issues. So somehow, I think, I don't have the answer, but I think somehow we need to get radical feminists to start to ask those questions. Why do they have these sexist views of men? And they're so quick to male bash or make jokes about men at their expense when they are victims of suicide or rape or violence or male genital mutilation, all these different issues, custody battle. So somehow we need to get them to ask the questions to themselves, if that's possible. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have the answer.
Dan, our local celebrity.
Cass, nice to see you. Thank you. You, husband, mother, anybody else that influenced you growing up. Thank you for showing integrity. Thank you for being true to your trade. Okay? I wish you all the best in the future. I will impart with you a quote by Thoreau: go confidently in the direction of your dreams and live the life you imagine. I wish that for you and your husband. I'd also like to invite you, I don't know if you've been following what I've been doing lately. Done 2 suicide walks, awareness walks. I walked from Dundas to Toronto. When the first one, geez, I might have been a little bit of one of those angry voices, and I parked my butt in front of Queen's Park there for 9 days and did a hunger strike. Earned the respect of those individuals who guard where we are supposed to come together to discuss the issues that face society. Earned that respect of those individuals there. The second suicide walk, I had to do it without my dog Jeb. Passed away. My Jedi warrior. He brought smiles to my face, and smiles to a lot of other people's faces. I did it myself. I had to kind of modify it. He died just before the walk there. So I circumvented it, I cut it down. The tally was, it was 60 miles, 45 pounds on my back down to 42 hours. At the end of that journey, there was a cafe there. They were offering me sanctuary twice on those walks. I'll also point out that Sergeant Gus, security staff at Queen's Park there, honorable individuals. You remember one of my proudest moments was when you were doing some interviews there, and I upheld the journalist right under Section 2 of the Charter Rights and Freedoms. You were one of those. Damn proud of my moment, that moment there. Okay, so I'm disappointed that our feminist counterpart didn't show up. I'm going to ask a question to them. I'm going to put it out there, float it out there for everything, and I'm going to Canadianize things a little bit for you, eh? I'm going to spin a little bit of Dangolf here, some wizardly talk. Because I do everything off the top of my head. Memorized.
They have a running late. Can you go to the question?
I'm going to ask for a little bit of latitude here. Do not make me invoke my rights for accommodation for post-traumatic stress disorder. Don't make me do that. Okay, Canadian numbers. I asked feminism to justify itself. Feminism fought genital mutilation, 268.3, the courts of the Criminal Code of Canada.
What's the question?
What is the question? What's your question, sir?
I am waiting for you.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that want to ask questions.
We're here to deal with men's issues. He's a man with an issue. Shut the fuck up. I want to hear him speak.
No.
Speak up and hold on.
We will end the question period.
What you gonna do about it?
Hang on.
We will end the question period.
Let's give other people the same.
Justify themselves. They forgot to make genital mutilation against men illegal when they made it against women. We're going to go on to the domestic violence thing. 2 general social surveys, parity. Okay, ultimate, lots of money going in, $145 million a year into the DV industry in Ontario alone. And on the death end of things, let's go with male suicide. Men are 77% of all suicides in Canada. Despite this fact, we have Canadian Mental Health or Canadian Health Association's website There is 8,350 papers for women's mental health and 5,500
Yeah,
for men's
these are great points, but
My
I have to
question, I
ask
ask
you.
feminism to justify itself.
Thank you.
Now, for the
Yeah,
men's
yeah,
rights
yeah,
movement,
yeah.
my question to
We're gonna
them
go
is
to
to
some other
justify themselves when they silence voices like mine, who is an expert
But
in
there are 400 other
these
voices.
We
here.
want to
Okay, so you make
allow
your
everyone
points
to have a
and good
chance
points.
to have a
We're gonna move
voice.
on.
So, next question, we'll take another question. Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you, Cassie. It was a very interesting film. I'd like to self-identify as a feminist, but I also want to say that I'm here to learn, and I'm here to hear a different perspective. And there are things that really resonated with me in the film, but there's also things that I didn't agree with. Certainly from a Canadian perspective, some of the stats don't work. But the fact is that I think what Cassie's trying to do is ask feminists not to be really angry or radical, and to keep an open mind. And I'm a little bit concerned about the level of anger I've seen in this room, and that I heard at different points to the film. So what I'd like to do is to say I am here to hear you and to listen, and I really enjoyed the film, but I'd also like to invite all of us as men and women to hear each other and to work together, and I did feel a little bit of concern here tonight.
Did you guys want to comment on that, or ask them? Or do you want to answer anything they've heard so far? Any Dan or the young lady's comments, or we can move to another question.
I'll just say briefly, unless Cassie, do you want to say something? Or?
You can go first. I'll comment after.
I was just thinking, having been in the trenches of like the gender conversation for a decade, this trenches actually. It's one of the most, I think, vitriolic conversations. I actually saw an AVF, a Voice for Men guy, I forget his name now, but he was writing about this on a review of this, that it's the dirtiest topic he's ever gotten involved with, as far as like the tension on both sides. So I think for me, I'm really interested in creating those spaces of dialogue, and it's really hard, and it's hard for people who maybe don't feel like experts on the topic as well to come in and have an opinion because they feel they might get shut down. So I really just wanted to validate that concern and feeling. I will say personally, controversially, because I know probably people are more on one side here, but I've definitely had bad experiences on both sides of this conversation. I've had bad experiences with MRAs, I've had bad experiences with feminists, and I tend to piss off everyone a little bit. So I would just say that it's not just one way, although I totally get, the bigger voice, institutional power. I'm not trying to deny any of that. So that's all I just want to say on that.
Okay, we'll take two more questions.
Cassie, was good.
Yes, Cassie, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, just a quick comment to the last lady who had her comment in the audience. I support what she said. I think the discussion is important no matter what your label is. And I agree with the woman on the panel who just spoke that there's institutional power favored on one side. I mean, we often have very loud microphones given to women's rights activists and feminists, but it's a rare and underfunded occurrence that men's issues get a platform to speak without being shut down. So I'm hoping that there is more discussion around men's issues, and if we can add that to the gender equality discussion without easily being offended or feeling like it's an attack on all women, that's often something I've seen with when you're discussing women's issues, then men have and do feel like their issues are ignored, and they have been ignored since the 70s, especially. Just all these different decades of women getting approval for speaking about their issues and support, and when men try to speak, they get silenced. So if we can add them to the discussion, I think that's where we need to head. I'm glad to see that there's some feminists in the audience. I'm really glad to see that. So thank you all for coming.
Your questions and comments online on Twitter at Equality Canada. Yes, sir?
Thank
Cassie, for your film. Did you enter this into the Toronto International Film Festival?
Could you say that again?
Did you enter this into the Toronto International Film Festival?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
I missed the deadline. So, no conspiracy there. That could have been if I submitted it again. I didn't submit.
Okay. Last question, yes. You, me? Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I have a three-pronged question. One, what technology did you use to get your content? And because we have an academic, a journalist, and yourself present, we're so lucky, thank you all. How can we, especially as educators, encourage students to follow a similar path that you did, especially since we all have technology at our disposal at any given moment? And the bulk of my day is a news feed of like people's lunches instead of helping bridge the gap between the prevailing hegemony and the polls that we have at all odds. And then the last part that I'm interested in is also how can we equip students to filter through the information so that they don't get swept up at either pole, so they can make their own informed choice. And the final thought, I wanted to thank you. I see a lot of independent projects in Toronto. This was one of the most artistically ethical documentaries that I've been lucky enough to see. You gave everything unfiltered, and I did not immediately see any sort of bias. It was absolutely fabulous, so thank you for this gift.
Vanessa, you want to start?
She's asking questions. Okay. Oh, Cassie, did you want to start it?
Sure. Was the question about the equipment used? I couldn't really hear the questions.
Yes.
Equipment?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was DSLRs, Canon Mark III, and the Zoom H4n audio with the boom mic attached. It's very low budget running gun, pretty much just two people on set filming interviews most of the time. And I'm self-taught. I didn't go to film school, so if you have a passion for filmmaking, just have at it and watch tutorials online. That's what I did. And what was the other questions?
Okay,
Well, I'll focus on the third one, because that's what I'm really interested in. How can we, in this society where we're constantly flooded with information, how can we encourage students, or rather, how can we equip them with the tools to filter through the information, to come to their own consensus, or to, so they don't get swept up in the throes of either pole?
Well, have you guys heard of the echo chamber, I'm sure, where you follow everything online that you know you would already agree with, and so it just keeps on bouncing the same perspectives back and forth over and over through every ear canal, and you don't really get an alternate perspective. I think that is dangerous, and I think social media has a large part to do with that. We do tend to like and follow people or organizations we already know we'd agree with. So finding a different perspective, it took me meeting people in person to really start to understand where they're coming from. I think just reading articles online about what mental activists believed didn't quite convince me or really get me to understand their perspective. But meeting them in person, then I could ask the question right there that I had for them. Explain to me this, well, what's your view on this? And I often ask them questions about women's issues because I wanted to know that they knew about these women's issues before I could move forward and talk about men's issues. So, if people could meet in person and have a discussion with, these kind of debates in person, I think that would help. Maybe just start liking pages that you would disagree with, like Twitter or Facebook pages, and instead of always going to that page to convince other people of your point of view, maybe try to understand their point of view.
I agree with what Cassie said, and I think it takes us, some people are just more inclined to be curious about other perspectives Other people are a bit more, you know, in their perspective and have a harder time shifting. So I notice it's kind of a personality type thing as well. But I do think the social media thing is a huge issue, the way we're creating echo chambers. I purposely subscribe to conservative sites and liberal sources, and I read, sometimes I'll start reading a ton of like men's rights stuff and I get really convinced about something, and then I purposely go and read a bunch of feminist stuff. So I just do it to try to always shake up my perspective and be on my own edge, I guess you could say. So that's how I deal with it. And you're never 100% sure. There's so much bias in all the information out there. So you kind of have to be in dialogue with people. And I think it's also a conversation. We have to figure it out together.
I'll just add to that. I think the fact that you're asking that question suggests that you're strongly on the right path figuring out the answer. It's really not all that difficult, as Cassie and
Vanessa.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. My point was that I think Cassie and Vanessa have both addressed it correctly, which is seek out a diversity of opinions. Don't allow people or don't allow students to just go to the same sources constantly. You know, a good friend of mine is actually here tonight who is undecided on this. And he sent me a message earlier today. I'm going to read it to you because I think it typifies the mentality that you want to see in students, and it's this. He said, "My whole angle is that maybe I don't believe in what your movement represents, but one of the few things I actually believe in is freedom of speech. I'm just checking out the film and discussion to learn." And that's all you can do. Just keep an open mind.
Yes, so it's a thing on the panel, wasting everybody's time. I'm going to just ask Cassie one quick question, which is, what do you make of what just happened in Ottawa? And how do you turn that into an opportunity?
Oh gosh, I think it's really unfortunate. It's something that's happening over and over, where people who haven't seen the film are trying to ban it or cancel or already sold out screenings. And unfortunately, there's the same talking points that are scripted lies about the film that get repeated over and over. And even really big mainstream media film critics have repeated these lies, and that's unfortunately what keeps getting spread and believed about this film from people who haven't seen it. So Ottawa is, it's officially the second screening to ever be canceled by the theater due to protesters calling in and threatening the theater or threatening to remove their attendance to that theater. So the second worldwide, the first was Melbourne, and we also had a Sydney screening that the University of Sydney originally approved the screening of the Red Pill, and tickets were sold, and then a couple weeks later they revoked approval, so they're now looking for a new venue. And so, you know, I feel bad for people in Ottawa that, you know, I guess that's a vocal, large movement there that is, has power to call theaters and tell them to censor a film if they disagree with the content. And no one in this discussion has seen the film. The Mayfair theater people have not, and the protesters have not.
I think that we have to know we are not reacting in anger to a number of points that were made here, but instead we're going to use this as an opportunity to build a home for men and families, an Ottawa Men's Center. That's what we're going to translate this into.
Okay, I think tonight we at UT succeeded in offering exactly a very edible, wide-reaching red pill. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Vanessa, Fisher, Patrick Bissett, Cassie, Jay. We are
help us build a home for men and families in the nation's capital, keep the home we have in Toronto going, and help us spread awareness across Canada.